In the heart of Freetown, where kiki horns pierced through the morning air and street hawkers called out for cassava bread and fried fish with pepper sauce. Two childhood friends walked very different paths. Amadou was the kind of man you heard before you saw. His voice always above the crowd. Quick to argue about football, politics, or even the price of tomatoes at the market. He loved being the center of attention, throwing out opinions like coins in the air, even when no one asked for them. Tamba, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. He moved with quiet confidence, his words measured and rare. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people leaned in. The traders in Victoria Park Market trusted his judgment. The youths in the neighborhood sought his advice, and the elders respected his calmness. Where Amadou chased noise, Tamba commanded respect through silence. One humid evening, as the orange glow of sunset fell over the streets of Freetown, Amadou and Tamba sat at a roadside bar, sipping local ginger beer from glass bottles. The aroma of grilled chicken from a roadside vendor mixed with the chatter of the evening crowd. A tall, sharply dressed businessman in a dark suit and polished shoes walked up to their wooden table. His voice was smooth, his words careful. He leaned forward and began to explain an opportunity. An investment in a new transport company that, according to him, promised quick returns. But before the man could finish, Amadou slammed his glass bottle on the table, cutting him off. With his chest puffed out, he began to boast loudly. Transport business? My brother, that's a minor. I already know how to make millions from it. In fact, I've been planning to buy 10 buses myself. His voice rose above the music and noise of the street, drawing the attention of other customers. He bragged, exaggerated, and even made promises he could not keep, claiming connections, money, and plans that only existed in his imagination. Meanwhile, Tamba sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the businessman, saying nothing. Tamba did not interrupt. He sat still on the rough wooden bench, the rim of his glass bottle resting gently against his fingers. His eyes stayed fixed on the businessman, not with suspicion, but with the calm intensity of someone weighing every word. The businessman's voice was smooth. Practiced, like a man who had sold many dreams before, he spoke about buses that would run across the provinces, from Freetown to Kenema and beyond. Of investors who would triple their money in less than a year. Of passengers who were already waiting for a service that barely existed. He smiled at the right moments, lowered his voice as if sharing a secret, and tapped his polished shoe against the dusty ground to punctuate his promises. Amadou barely noticed the rhythm of the man's words. His mind was already racing, imagining himself as the new transport mogul of Freetown. Bragging to friends about owning a fleet of buses. But Tamba listened differently. He caught the slight hesitation in the man's tone whenever money was mentioned. He noticed how the businessman's eyes flickered away whenever he spoke of guarantees. He heard the spaces between the words. The too perfect promises that rang hollow when held up to the light of silence. To Amadou, the offer was a stage to perform. To Tamba, it was a puzzle to be studied. He measured the man's pauses. The way his smile did not quite reach his eyes. The over-polished way he repeated, "You cannot lose." And in that silence, Tamba learned more than Amadou would ever hear in all his loudness. Amadou leaned forward. Chest puffed out like a cock ready to crow. The businessman slid a thick folder across the table, its papers crisp, heavy with official stamps and signatures. To Amadou, it looked like opportunity wrapped in gold. He didn't even open the file. "Where do I sign?" he asked, his voice full of pride. The businessman smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides more than it reveals. "Right here, sir," he said, tapping the page with a manicured finger. Tamba shifted in his seat, his brow furrowed. He wanted to say something. To tell Amadou to slow down. To at least read the words inked in small print. But Amadou waved him off. "Don't worry, I know business," he boasted. "This is how millionaires are made." Without a single question, Amadou scribbled his name across the paper. He didn't notice the missing company seal. He didn't see that the contract promised him nothing in writing about returns. He didn't ask why the so-called transport company had no physical garage. No buses on the ground. Only glossy photographs in a brochure. For weeks, he bragged around town. "I'm now a shareholder," he told anyone who would listen. "Very soon, he'll be running fleets across the eastern province and beyond." People clapped him on the back, and Amadou walked taller. His head filled with dreams of wealth. But within a month, reality hit. The office where the businessman had hosted him was locked, the signboard stripped away overnight. The phone numbers no longer went through. The partners disappeared into thin air. Amadou's savings, every last Leone, had vanished with them. He stood in front of the empty office, papers still clutched in his hand, his chest hollow, his voice broken. For the first time, silence swallowed him. He had spoken too much, listened too little, and now the lesson was carved into his life with pain. The fool speaks, but the wise man listens. While Amadou's voice had filled the room with noise, Tamba's silence had filled it with wisdom. He had watched the businessman closely that night. The way the man's eyes darted each time Tamba asked a question. The way his hands gripped the folder a little too tightly. The way his promises came too easily, like a rehearsed script. Something wasn't right. Tamba felt it in his gut. So when Amadou rushed to sign, Tamba simply folded his arms, nodded politely, and said, "I'll think about it." He walked away quietly, ignoring Amadou's mocking laugh. "You'll remain poor if you keep doubting opportunities," Amadou had shouted after him. But Tamba wasn't moved. In the weeks that followed, Tamba did what he always did best. He listened. In the market, he listened to traders complain about transport costs. In the evenings, he listened to old men at beer parlors grumble about how middlemen cheated them. He listened to his customers, to drivers, to farmers. Piece by piece, their words painted a picture clearer than any glossy brochure. Through these conversations, Tamba discovered something real. A friend of a friend introduced him to a cooperative that was pooling money to buy genuine motorbikes for commercial riders. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't coated with big promises. But it was solid, transparent, and practical. Tamba joined with the little he had. Slowly, the investment yielded returns. The riders brought daily income, and Tamba reinvested carefully. He expanded his tiny provisions shop, first adding more goods, then renting the space next door. Within a year, what had been a humble kiosk had grown into a respectable minimart, buzzing with customers. When people asked him the secret, he simply smiled and said, "I listened." Where Amadou had chased empty words and lost everything, Tamba had listened to truth, and it built him a future. It was a hot afternoon in the heart of Freetown, where the salty breeze from the Atlantic mixed with the smell of grilled fish and pepper soup from nearby street vendors. The streets bustled with the usual chaos. Okadas weaving through traffic. Market women balancing basins of oranges on their heads. And children chasing each other barefoot through narrow alleys. Amadou stood at the corner of Sani Abacha Street, leaning against a rusted pole. His shirt damp with sweat. His eyes followed a sight that made his chest tighten. Just across the street, beneath a wide blue signboard that read, "Tamba Wholesale VE Provisions." People moved in and out of a large, freshly painted shop. Workers unloaded sacks of rice, cartons of milk, and bottles of palm oil from a waiting truck. Young boys in branded aprons stacked goods neatly on wooden shelves. At the entrance, Tamba stood quietly, supervising with a calm smile. He wasn't loud. He wasn't waving his arms like Amadou always did. Yet the people around him, his staff, his customers, even the delivery men, treated him with respect. They listened when he spoke, not because he shouted, but because his words carried weight. Amadou's throat went dry as he watched his childhood friend hand out envelopes to his workers. It was payday. Dozens of people now depended on Tamba for their livelihood. The boy who used to sit in silence under the mango tree back in their neighborhood was now a man of substance. A man whose patience had built an empire. And what of Amadou? He shifted uneasily. His slippers dusty. His pockets almost empty. His loud boasts from months ago now echoed in his mind, mocking him. He remembered how he had laughed at Tamba's silence. How he had rushed into a fraudulent business deal to prove he was clever. And how it had left him with nothing. For the first time, the truth struck him like a hammer. His loud tongue had led him to poverty. But Tamba's quiet wisdom had led him to wealth. Amadou lowered his gaze. Ashamed, as a bitter wind swept in from the sea. The sun was dipping low over Freetown, casting a golden glow across the crowded streets. The call of a muezzin from a nearby mosque blended with the cries of women selling cassava leaves and fresh bonga fish. From the hills, the city lights slowly flickered to life, while the Atlantic breeze carried the scent of salt and roasted fish. Amadou sat on a broken wooden bench just outside Tamba's thriving shop. His head bowed. His shirt collar sagging with dust and sweat. He had spent the last hour watching his childhood friend hand out wages to his employees. Listening as customers praised Tamba's honesty and fairness. Finally, he lifted his eyes, and with a cracked voice, he asked. Tamba. How did you do it? How did you build all this, while I've lost everything? Tamba looked at him for a long moment. He didn't rush to answer. Instead, he sat beside Amadou. His gaze fixed on the horizon where the ocean kissed the fading sun. His voice was calm. Steady, almost like a father speaking to a son. My brother, Tamba began, when we were boys, you always wanted to be the loudest in the room. You thought if you shouted louder than everyone, people would believe you were wise. But wisdom doesn't come from noise. It comes from silence. Amadou swallowed hard, saying nothing. Tamba continued. His eyes never leaving the sea. If you want to learn, you must first listen. The man who talks too much blinds himself. He hears only his own noise and misses the truth hidden in other people's words. But the one who listens sees beyond the surface. He hears what is said, and what is not said. That's where wisdom lives. He turned to Amadou then, his face soft but firm. The fool speaks. The wise man listens. The words hung heavy in the humid evening air. For the first time in his life, Amadou did not argue. Did not boast. Did not make excuses. He simply lowered his head, ashamed but awakened. And as the waves crashed faintly in the distance, he realized that true wealth was not just in money or shops, but in the humility to listen. The streets of Freetown were growing quiet. The last glow of sunset had faded behind the green hills, and the sound of the Atlantic waves rolled faintly in the distance. Amadou still sat outside Tamba's provisions shop, his head heavy with thoughts. He had heard the truth from his childhood friend, but the weight of it was only now beginning to sink deep. Tamba, calm as always, stood beside him with his arms folded. His eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. His words were not rushed, nor were they loud. They were deliberate, each one carrying the weight of lived experience. Amadou, he said softly. Life rewards those who listen more than they speak. Talking may draw attention, but listening builds understanding. A man can fill the air with words. But it is in silence that wisdom is born. Words may impress for a moment, but silence uncovers truth. When you truly listen, you begin to see things others overlook. The fear in a trembling voice. The lie hidden in smooth promises. The opportunity tucked in quiet corners. That is why the fool speaks. But the wise man listens. Amadou's eyes burned as he lowered his gaze. For once in his life, he had no reply. He simply nodded. It was the beginning of humility. The birth of a new man. The night breeze carried the sound of crickets through the air, as if even the city itself was listening. And so, dear friends, remember this truth. Life does not reward the noisiest, but the most attentive. A wise heart is slow to speak but quick to understand. Talking may impress, but listening transforms. Thanks for watching Geraldinho Stories. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.